Before I start, I've got some exciting news to share, but less exciting for Mama Crow, who wonders if I need to say this every time. But yes, Mother, this is a phenomenal event, so you need to put up with my waxing lyrical a little while longer. So mark your calendars for CrimeCon Manchester 2025, partnered by True Crime, which is set to take place on the 27th of September 2025. So CrimeCon UK is going to Manchester for the very first time this year, and I will be there, along with some of the biggest names in true crime, at the ultimate true crime event. Now, whether you've been watching my content from the start, or maybe you've just started binging, this is your chance to meet me in person, share your theories, and even uncover new details behind the stories that I cover. I am very excited to meet up with people and have no expectations that people are excited to meet me. But nonetheless, join me and the true crime community at CrimeCon Manchester, partnered by True Crime, the expert-led true crime channel available across all platforms. Let's make this the most unforgettable CrimeCon yet. You won't want to miss it. I genuinely hope to see you there. Now on with the episode. We've seen before that family dynamics, especially within a crowded household, can lead to frayed tempers, irritability, arguments and resentment. Normally these things pass, and when accommodation options reduce the pressure and everyone recovers to live and love another day. But sometimes these feelings, especially in young people unused to dealing with such negative emotions, this can sometimes boil over into rage or fester into a desire to relieve that pressure at any cost. We're heading to a new destination for Murder of Crows for this episode in the form of the Philippines. To see this in action, where we will go to 2020 and then work backwards, as the investigators had to do following a terrible discovery during some renovation work. This is the terribly tragic story of Maria Evelyn Sayos, and this is Murder of Crows. The Philippines, officially the Republic of the Philippines, is an archipelagic country in Southeast Asia. Located in the Western Pacific Ocean, it consists of 7,641 islands, with a total area of roughly 300,000 square kilometers. And these are broadly categorized in three main geographical divisions from north to south: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. The population of over 110 million, it is the world's 12th most populous country. The Philippines is bounded by the South China Sea to the west, the Philippine Sea to the east, and the Celebes Sea to the south. It shares maritime borders with Taiwan to the north, Japan to the northeast, Palau to the east and southeast, Indonesia to the south, Malaysia to the southwest, Vietnam to the west, and China to the northwest. Whew. It has diverse ethnicities and a rich culture. Manila is the country's capital, and its most populated city is Quezon City. Both are within Metro Manila. Negritos, the archipelago's earliest inhabitants, were followed by waves of Austronesian peoples. The adoption of animism, Hinduism with Buddhist influence, and Islam established island kingdoms. Extensive overseas trade with neighbours, such as the late Tang or Song Empire, brought Chinese people to the archipelago, and these would gradually settle in and intermix over the centuries. The arrival of the explorer Ferdinand Magellan marked the beginning of Spanish colonization. In 1543, Spanish explorer Ruy López de Villalobos named the archipelago Las Islas Filipinas in honor of King Philip II. Catholicism became the dominant religion, and Manila became the western hub of trans-Pacific trade. Today, the Philippines is an emerging market and a developing and newly industrialized country, whose economy is transitioning from being agricultural to service and manufacturing centered. Its location as an island country on the Pacific Ring of Fire and close to the equator makes it prone to earthquakes and typhoons. The Philippines has a variety of natural resources and a globally significant level of biodiversity. The country is part of multiple international organizations and forums. One of its many provinces is Cavite in the Calabarzon region. Cavite, officially the province of Cavite, is a province of the Philippines located in the Calabarzon region. Situated in the southern shores of Manila Bay, it is one of the most industrialized and fastest growing provinces in the Philippines. The province holds major historical significance, with most of the Philippine Revolution taking place within several areas of Cavite. The revolution ultimately led to the renouncement of Spanish colonial control, culminating in the Philippine Declaration of Independence on June the 12th, 1898. In the town of Kawit. The old provincial city, Cavite City, also hosted docks for the Manila Galleon, becoming an essential part of commerce between Asia and Latin America at the time. The name Cavite comes from the Hispanicized form of Kawit, which was Tagalog for hook, in reference to the small hook-shaped peninsula jutting out to Manila Bay. The name originally applied to the peninsula Cavite La Punta, now Cavite City, and the adjacent lowland coastal area of Cavite Viejo. The peninsula was also known in the pre-colonial era as Tangway, from the Tagalog for peninsula. Edmund Roberts, in his 1821 memoir, stated the natives called it Cavite due to the crooked point of land extending into the sea. In 2002, Region 4 was split into two parts, with Region 4A known as Calabarzon and Region 4B known as Mimaropa, and Cavite was made part of Region 4A, which is also known as the Southern Tagalog mainland. It is through the province of Cavite that we travel today to look at a home renovation in Dasmariñas in 2020. And this was to update a kitchen and was being carried out by a man trying to move forward even though his mother had been missing for 4 years. John Michael Sayos had reported his mother missing in 2018, but no trace of her had been found in the intervening 2 years. The plan was simple: update the space so that it would be fresh and welcoming when his mother Evelyn eventually returned from Singapore, where he was led to believe that she had travelled to in 2016. Construction workers hired for the renovation immediately noticed problems. The kitchen floor showed signs of repeated patching and repair, with visible cracks that suggested perhaps structural issues beneath the surface. When they began excavating to address what they assumed were septic tank problems, a foul odour began emanating from below the foundation, initially attributed to sewage problems from the likely septic tank issues, and the smell intensified as digging progressed. But there soon came a troubling find: the discovery of Evelyn Sayos' passport and identification documents buried in the construction debris. And this marked the moment when suspicion transformed into a likely certainty. John Michael's world collapsed as he realized the implications of the find. If his mother's passport was buried beneath their kitchen floor this whole time, she could never have left the Philippines. Police response was swift once they understood the gravity of the situation. Led by Police Captain Arthur Nace and his team from the Das Marinas City Police Station, investigators secured the scene and began a methodical excavation of the area around the septic tank. The smell the construction workers had noticed grew overwhelming as they broke through layers of concrete and approached the sealed tank. What they found inside the septic tank would haunt everyone present that day. Evelyn's body, severely decomposed after 4 years, was curled in a fetal position within the cramped space. The remains were so deteriorated that initial identification relied on dental records as well as personal effects found with the body. The subsequent DNA analysis would confirm what everybody already knew within their hearts. This was Maria Evelyn Sayos, the loving mother who had supposedly been living freely in Singapore. And despite the advanced decomposition, pathologists could identify multiple skull fractures consistent with hammer blows, stab wounds to the neck and chest, and defensive injuries that painted a picture of a woman fighting desperately for her life. The autopsy confirmed that Evelyn had died from her injuries, not from any natural causes or accident. Authorities now had two lines of inquiry that would ultimately converge. Who was in the household when Evelyn was last physically seen, and who had suggested that she had gone to Singapore? In the Sayos household in 2016, the family dynamic was complex, but not uncommon in Filipino households. John Michael, the son, was more reserved and mature, often serving as a stabilizing influence. Joanna, his sister, embodied teenage rebellion in its most challenging form. She was drawn to parties, drinking, and the kind of reckless behavior that kept her mother awake at night with worry. The tension between Evelyn's protective instincts and Joanna's desire for independence created an undercurrent of conflict that would simmer for years. But typical teenage friction between a mother and daughter does not usually spell murder. Note my use of the word usually. When Joanna became pregnant at 16 by her boyfriend Ronald James Ruby, the fragile family equilibrium shattered. For Evelyn, steeped in traditional Catholic values, her daughter's unmarried pregnancy represented not just a personal disappointment, but a public embarrassment in their close-knit community. But rising above this, Evelyn's initial anger gave way to practical support. She would help raise the child, provide financially, and hope that motherhood may mature her wayward daughter. The arrangement that followed Joanna's pregnancy would ultimately prove to be the foundation for the tragedy that would happen in the future. Ronald moved into the family home, creating a household of 5, spanning 3 generations. Evelyn, Joanna, Ronald, their baby, and of course John Michael. What should have been a time of new beginnings instead became a festering pit of resentment, financial strain, and generational conflict. Evelyn found herself not only supporting her unemployed daughter and her boyfriend, but also taking primary responsibility for her grandchild when Joanna proved unreliable as a mother. The emotional toll on Evelyn was immense. After years of sacrifice to raise her own children, she now faced the prospect of essentially starting over with a grandchild while supporting 2 able-bodied adults who showed little initiative or gratitude. Ronald, in particular, bristled at Evelyn's expectations that he find work and contribute to the household. His resentment grew with every conversation about responsibility, with every suggestion about employment, with every reminder that he was living in her home. A boy living without taking any responsibility, even though he was himself now a father. He seemed to ignore the issue and continued to live the life of a carefree child. And for Joanna, her mother's criticism felt suffocating. What Evelyn saw as necessary guidance, Joanna perceived as nagging and interference. The young mother wanted freedom to live her life, without lectures about responsibility. And at the same time, Evelyn couldn't understand how her daughter could be so careless about her child's welfare. And these daily tensions in all directions built and festered over months and years, and led to an atmosphere of conflict that was eventually going to explode. The warning signs were there for those who took note of them. Neighbours would notice raised voices sometimes from the Sayos home. Friends observed that Evelyn seemed more stressed and tired than usual. But in a culture that values family privacy and where domestic disputes are often considered private matters, no one intervened. And the stage was therefore set for a tragedy that would shock even the investigators with its brutality and the calculated cover-up that followed. August the 20th, 2016 began as an ordinary Saturday in the Sayos household, but it would end with an act of unthinkable violence that transformed the family kitchen into a crime scene. The events of that evening, later reconstructed through confessions and forensic evidence, reveal a premeditated murder that was as brutal as it was heartless. According to investigators and Joanna's eventual confession, the plan to kill Evelyn had been developing for months. Ronald James Ruby, increasingly bitter about his unemployment and Evelyn's constant criticism, had begun filling Joanna's head with resentment against her own mother. What started as complaints about Evelyn's nagging gradually evolved into something darker. Discussions about how much easier life would be without her constant interference. And Ronald's manipulation was both insidious and effective. Ronald convinced Joanna that her mother was the source of all of their problems, and that Evelyn's traditional values and expectations were holding them back from happiness. For a young woman already struggling with the responsibilities of motherhood and feeling overwhelmed by her mother's expectations, these toxic ideas took root and flourished. The couple began discussing various scenarios, eventually settling on a plan that they believed would allow them to inherit the house and live freely without Evelyn's supervision. Now, I would be reluctant to see this as a folie à deux, where both participants are equally caught up in a mindset. Rather, it seems to me that Ronald was the puppet master who designed the downfall of the person that he saw as standing in the way of a peaceful life of freedom from concern and responsibility. On the fateful evening, with careful premeditation, Joanna approached her mother with an unusual request. She told Evelyn that she had prepared a surprise for her in the basement area of their home. Now, given their strained relationship, Evelyn would perhaps have been forgiven for being hopeful that perhaps her daughter was making an effort to reconcile. Trusting and ever hopeful, Evelyn followed her daughter downstairs, unaware she was walking straight into a trap. Ronald was waiting in the shadows, armed with a hammer that would become the primary murder weapon. The attack was swift and vicious. As Evelyn descended into the basement, Ronald struck her from behind with multiple blows to the head. The forensic examination would later reveal that these initial strikes caused severe skull fractures, but were not immediately fatal. Evelyn collapsed, but was still breathing, still clinging to life despite the catastrophic injuries. It was at this crucial moment that the true horror of the crime became apparent. Rather than calling for help or showing any mercy, Ronald instructed Joanna to complete the murder herself. He handed her a knife and ordered her to finish what they had started. In a moment that would haunt investigators and the local community, Joanna took the weapon and stabbed her own mother multiple times. The autopsy report painted a grim picture of Evelyn's final moments. She had suffered multiple skull fractures from the hammer blows, 2 stab wounds to the neck, 5 stab wounds to the chest, and a deep gash across her right arm, likely a defensive wound, as she tried to protect herself from her daughter's assault. The forensic pathologist concluded that the pattern and severity of injuries indicated a crime of passion filled with rage and hatred. No shit. After the murder, the couple's actions revealed the calculated nature of their crime. They dragged Evelyn's lifeless body upstairs to the kitchen area, where they had already prepared for the concealment phase of their plan. Behind the house was an unfinished septic tank that would become Evelyn's tomb. With methodical precision, they opened the tank and dumped her body inside, treating their victims' remains with the same respect they might show towards household waste. Ronald then made a trip to a nearby hardware store, purchasing cement, gravel and sand with the same casual demeanour of any homeowner working on a renovation project. Neighbours would later recall seeing him mixing cement in the yard, never suspecting that they were witnessing the final phase of a murder cover-up. The couple sealed the septic tank, effectively entombing Evelyn beneath what would become their kitchen floor. Their biggest mistake, and one that would ultimately lead to their downfall, was failing to install proper ventilation for the gases that would inevitably build up from the decomposing body. And it was this oversight that would cause the kitchen floor to crack repeatedly over the following years, requiring Ronald to patch it again and again, each repair knowingly marking time until the crime would be discovered, never realizing that the unvented gases would inevitably lead to further cracking in the future. From the moment that Joanna announced her mother's departure on August 20th, 2016, red flags appeared for those who knew Evelyn best. Friends who had planned to meet her for coffee were told she had suddenly left for Singapore to clear her head after a family disagreement. And while this did seem plausible on the surface, the manner of her departure felt completely out of character. The first major inconsistency emerged in Evelyn's communication patterns. Historically an active Facebook user who loved sharing photos and staying connected with friends, her online presence became strangely sterile and impersonal. Gone were the upbeat posts, the photos from her travels, and the warm, conversational tone that characterized her previous social media activity. Instead, her posts became short, formal, and oddly distant. More concerning was her complete avoidance of voice or video calls. When concerned relatives in Singapore offered to meet up with her, she consistently declined, claiming to be busy, sick, or traveling to other parts of the country. For a woman who had always maintained close family ties and regularly video called her children, this silence felt somewhat ominous. Every attempt at direct communication was deflected to text messages, and even those responses seemed delayed and formal. Something definitely seemed off. Evelyn's son, Michael, became increasingly suspicious as months turned into years. The woman responding to messages didn't sound like his mother. The warmth was gone, replaced by stilted responses that felt more like business correspondence than family communication. His growing unease was shared by extended family members and close friends, who found themselves making excuses for Evelyn's behaviour, while privately wondering what had really happened. For John Michael, the breaking point came in 2018, 2 years after Evelyn's disappearance, when John Michael could no longer ignore how he felt. He filed a missing persons report with local authorities, but his concerns were initially dismissed. Police pointed to evidence that seemed to support Joanna's story. Evelyn's passport was missing, her clothes were gone, and her Facebook account remained active. To overworked investigators, this appeared to be a case of an adult exercising her right to disappear and start again. But John Michael was not willing to let it go, and his persistence eventually paid off. He continued to press authorities, sharing his detailed knowledge of his mother's habits, personality, and communication style. He explained that Evelyn would never abandon her grandchild without explanation, never ignore family emergencies, and never maintain such prolonged silence with her son. His intimate knowledge of his mother's character gradually convinced investigators that something was genuinely amiss. So jumping back to the discovery of Evelyn's remains, and despite the advanced decomposition, as we've stated, the pathologists could identify multiple skull fractures consistent with hammer blows, stab wounds to the neck and chest, as well as defensive injuries that painted a picture of a woman fighting desperately for her life. And as we've discussed, the autopsy confirmed that Evelyn had died from her injuries. And Joanna and Ronald's initial denials crumbled under questioning as investigators presented the physical evidence and highlighted the impossibilities in their Singapore story. The elaborate social media charade, the repeated floor repairs, the missing passport. Each piece of evidence made their story less credible. Faced with mounting evidence and skilled interrogation techniques, both suspects eventually confessed to their roles in the murder, and their admissions filled in the horrific details of that August evening and revealed the full extent of their 4-year deception. The legal proceedings in the Evelyn Sayos murder case revealed both the strengths and frustrations of the Philippine criminal justice system. While the confessions provided a clear picture of the crime, the path to justice proved complex, and according to some accounts, frustratingly slow for a family seeking closure after 4 years of uncertainty and lies. Following their arrests in July of 2020, both Joanna Marie Sayos and Ronald James Ruby were charged with murder under Article 248 of the Revised Penal Code of the Philippines. The charges were filed before the Regional Trial Court in Dasmariñas, Cavite. Additionally, Joanna faced charges of parricide, or the killing of one's own parent, which carries severe penalties under Philippine law. The prosecution case appeared overwhelming from the outset. Beyond the suspect's detailed confessions, investigators had assembled a compelling array of physical evidence. The forensic examination of Evelyn's remains provided clear proof of homicide, with multiple trauma injuries that ruled out any possibility of natural death or accident. The location of the body, sealed within the family's septic tank, demonstrated premeditation and deliberate concealment. And perhaps most damaging to the defense of all was the 4-year digital deception that followed. Investigators had carefully documented how Joanna had used her mother's social media accounts to maintain the illusion that Evelyn was alive and living in Singapore. Digital forensics experts traced the posts to devices within the family home, proving that someone with access to Evelyn's accounts had been impersonating her for years. The case also revealed the psychological manipulation that had led up to the crime. During interrogation, details emerged about Ronald's role in fostering Joanna's resentment towards her mother. Investigators document how he had systematically turned the young woman against Evelyn, convincing her that their financial problems and relationship issues were all due to her mother's interference and expectations. However, despite the apparent strength of the prosecution's case, the legal proceedings faced significant delays and complications. One of the most controversial aspects of the case was that both suspects were initially granted temporary liberty while awaiting trial. Fucking disgusting. According to reports from the time, prosecutors agreed to this arrangement while awaiting for final DNA confirmation of the victim's identity, despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence and the suspect's own confessions. This decision sparked considerable public outrage, particularly among victim advocacy groups, who argued that confessed murderers should not be walking free while the victim's family grieved. The prosecution team, led by experienced criminal prosecutors from the Cavite Provincial Prosecutor's Office, faced the challenge of proving premeditation and establishing the aggravating circumstances necessary for a murder conviction versus the lesser charge of homicide. They argued that the elaborate planning, the use of multiple weapons, and the extensive cover-up demonstrated clear intent and premeditation that elevated the crime beyond a simple killing. Both suspects initially pursued a strategy of diminished responsibility, arguing that the crime had been committed in the heat of passion during a family dispute. They attempted to portray the murder as an unplanned escalation of a domestic argument rather than a premeditated killing. However, this defense was undermined by evidence of the couple's planning and the sophisticated 4-year cover-up operation. One particularly damaging piece of evidence was the documentation of Ronald's repeated concrete purchases and floor repairs over the 4 years following the murder. Hardware store receipts and neighbor testimony established a pattern of behavior consistent with covering up the decomposition gases that were cracking the kitchen floor above Evelyn's makeshift grave. As of the latest available information, the final disposition of the case remains unclear, highlighting broader issues with transparency in the Philippine judicial system. While initial reports suggested that both suspects would face serious prison sentences, the lack of publicly available final sentencing information has frustrated both the victim's family and true crime observers who have followed the case. The murder of Maria Evelyn Sayos stands as one of the most disturbing cases in recent Philippine criminal history. Not merely for its brutality, but for the calculated cruelty that followed. For 4 years, a mother's love was mocked by the very daughter she had sacrificed everything to support. While her body decomposed beneath the feet of those who claimed to miss her. The lack of a clear resolution adds to the agony of a public keen to see justice done, especially in the Philippines where the case made significant waves. This video is dedicated to Evelyn Sayos, and I send love to all of those touched by this crime, especially John Michael, who had always suspected something was amiss, only to find out that his own sister and her toxic boyfriend had taken his beloved mother away from him before embarking on a 4-year deception to cover any traces of a crime. Whatever the official legal outcome, it's safe to say that these two shitweasels will be facing significant time in prison, and long may they rot. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Don't forget that CrimeCon UK will be coming to Manchester in September, and there is still time to get involved with one of the UK's finest true crime events. And if you use my code CROWS, you can get 10% off tickets. You can't say fairer than that. But with that said, I'm Steve, this furball is Samson, and we will see you when we see you.